Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming out this evening. I hope it's not too hot. And it's great to meet you all. Tonight's talk is about meditation, which, of course, often is called mindfulness these days. I'm also going to talk about the theme of happiness and the idea of developing compassion. So my story with meditation started 26 years ago through profound unhappiness and very dangerous levels of stress, living a very extreme lifestyle. I wasn't looking after my health. I was going to parties all the time. I was drinking too much. I was smoking. I was really unhealthy in my lifestyle, but mainly also in my mind. I was completely unable to understand my own emotions. I was having panic attacks quite regularly, and these built up like a crescendo and developed into what was almost like a heart attack. So it was very dramatic. I woke up one morning unable to move, and my heart was jumping out of my body. I went from doctor to doctor, and they said, you have atrial fibrillation. Then another doctor said, you have a slight piece missing in your heart that's made you weak and susceptible to stress. Other doctors said you just need to slow down and you just need to learn how to deal with your mind. And I started to really get quite turned on to this idea that your mind is something you can train and develop, and you don't have to suffer, you don't have to. The way you think you are now is not your ultimate nature. These are the clouds, these are the weather, there is the sky behind that, there's something deeper. So this idea started to really obsess me. What are we here for? What are we doing on this planet? What's my role? What could I do? And I started to realize that if I stayed a monk and learnt more about the mind, I might be able to help other people with their minds, particularly because I'd had such a struggle myself with very severe anxiety disorder and depression. I thought, well, maybe I can work through this and then show and help others to do the same. I didn't imagine myself going around giving lectures or writing books or anything like that. I just thought in a simple way, maybe I can be of benefit. And what happened was my monastery asked me to start giving classes and giving courses. And this was way before the sort of big trend in mindfulness. So I was a little bit adventurous. I went into prisons and hospitals and drug rehab centers and just started giving classes, and people seemed to benefit. And my own practice was starting to grow. I mean, I was learning while teaching. I still am learning. Started to see how the meditation practice could help me to engage compassionately with this part of myself that I'd always found repulsive and always wanted to get rid of. I really started to get into it, and I started to really discover how you can train in happiness as a skill. It's a skill of the mind. And for me, I'm not saying it's like this for everybody, but for me it was very much about learning to engage with the parts of yourself you don't like. The fear, the anxiety, the horror, and meeting that in a loving way, happiness starts to grow because the resistance drops away. And one of the things I noticed most strongly was that people are feeling, invaded by information all the time. We used to have a different relationship with information. We could go towards the information. Now it comes to us. And so the news feeds are basically stoking everyone's cortisol levels and making people more anxious. I noticed really strongly when I started to teach people again was that their impatience became a problem in the meditation training. In that people meditate and then are waiting for something to happen immediately. And that's worse than it's ever been. It's very interesting how when somebody decides to learn meditation, they make this shift from external to internal, in that they make that decision that happiness is really a mind state, It's a state of being, it's something within. So if we meditate, we're learning to stop grabbing onto the happiness around us and instead finding it within. That's a very interesting shift. But what then happens is the person starts to look for happiness in the meditation. We didn't find it outside, so now let's find it inside. So we start to look for it in the meditation. And then we get more unhappy because we're grabbing onto a feeling all the time. Mind that thinks I want to be happy is the mind that thinks I am not happy. The more I want to feel happy, the more I'm telling myself I lack that feeling. And because everything in our mentality is a habit that perpetuates more of its own nature, that just grows. The more I want happiness, the more I'm building a feeling of lack. Learned how to link the meditation practice with two major things. One is acceptance, and the other one is compassion. So, and I'm still learning, don't put too much pressure on yourself for it to go well. Just do it. And what also I found very transformative is learning to meditate when I felt ill or when I felt unhappy. And of course, this learning to be with discomfort in a meditative way, because then you're not always striving for a good feeling. You're just learning to be with the moment, whatever that is. So I think that's a very important thing to explain and promote in the world of meditation and mindfulness, because many people tend to crave that sensation of well-being, which means they're maybe just creating the absence of well-being. So this is the question, what is happiness? If we're making this shift from, okay, it doesn't come from outside, it's a state of mind, the famous phrase, happiness comes from within, but what is it? What does that mean? So if it's not about having a great feeling, what is it? Well, I think it's very much about being less tormented by our thoughts. I think happiness is the same as freedom. Being free from having a tempestuous relationship with our own mind. About changing our relationship with our thoughts. This phrase, inner peace, is used a lot. I used to think inner peace meant silence. I thought it meant just everything should go away. But actually my definition of it has changed over the years, which is it's not about an inner silence, it's about being at peace with one's thoughts. So meditating is not about having an empty mind. That you could put yourself into an unconscious state by banging your head against a wall if that's what it is, but it's not. It's not about unconsciousness or trance or disappearing. It's about changing the relationship with the thoughts and emotions, which means to be less driven by them. It means to be able to step back and observe. It's very much about becoming the observer of the thoughts and emotions. Mind is bigger than its thoughts and emotions. When we can take the position of observer, being able to see, and just let the clouds go by, or almost like letting traffic go by on a road. Just imagine you're standing at the side of a busy road, and all these cars are going by. Well, trying to stop the traffic just creates a pile-up. There'll be a crash. But letting the cars go by, choosing not to get in them, would be a very different experience. And nobody says that's how we should live. I'm not saying we're supposed to live a life where our thoughts just go by and we never engage in them. It's just an exercise for 15 or 20 minutes a day, but it will change our relationship with our thoughts so that we can be less controlled by what goes on internally. I think we're all far too controlled by our thoughts and emotions. So even though as a culture we've fought so hard for external freedom, we don't have internal freedom. Because even if we are completely in control of our lives, we're not really in control of our minds, in that our minds often go to places we don't want our mind to go. Anyone who's meditated for 5 minutes knows that. You know how if you sit down and try to focus on your breathing, within about 3 seconds the plan fails because we start writing shopping lists or emails or planning revenge or whatever it is. The mind just goes, and it's quite humbling to see how little control we have. So why is that a problem? It's because when we are suffering, our mind is locked into the suffering. When we're distracted, our mind is locked into the distraction. When we're angry, when we're fearful, when we're sad, there's nothing wrong with feeling these things. It's very healthy to feel our emotions, but to be driven by them and to end up saying and doing things based on those emotional reactions that we then regret, that's a problem. And in fact, all of our social problems stem from that one source, people not being in control of their minds. So, back to the meditation technique, what is it? Well, it's about learning to step back and not engage in such a sticky, obsessive, craving way. But that's quite hard. It's hard to just step back. So we need something to hold on to. That's why we use an object in meditation as beginners. We use a focus. So you could use any focus. The idea is you're focusing your mind on that. So breathing, for example, you're focusing your mind on your own breathing, and then the plan fails, doesn't it? We fail in the mind wanders. But is it failure? That's the question. Is that failing? You see, I think many people see it as failing, and I would question that. So the classic situation is somebody sits there meditating, and they're trying to focus on their breathing, and then they realize that they go somewhere else. Very interesting how that happens, by the way. It's not that we are focusing on our breathing, and then we see our mind go for a walk and end up somewhere else. It's not like that. It's more that we're focusing on our breathing, and then we kind of blank out, we kind of go a bit unconscious, and then we wake up 5 minutes later skiing in the Alps, or whatever it is. We wake up somewhere else, and then we think, oh, where was I? I'm supposed to be meditating. And that's when we feel we failed, because we lost the meditation. But I would question that. I would question whether that really is failing. I would say, actually, that moment of realizing that you got lost is meditation. You are back with the awareness. So it's not a moment of failure, it's a moment of success. And then one brings one's attention back to the breath, gently, just returning to the breath, and then we're off again, and then we bring it back, and then we're off again. Not that quickly coming back, usually a long time, and then we come back. But that strengthens us. That strengthens our ability to be less controlled. Because what we're doing is every time we generate awareness and then come back to the breath, we are thinning down that mental glue that keeps us locked into those distractions and emotions. We're training ourselves in, well, if you read Buddhist books, they talk a lot about this phrase non-attachment, and people think that means you're not allowed to eat chocolate cake or have friends. That's not true. Non-attachment is exactly what I'm talking about here, which is not being so attached to the thoughts and emotions. So actually, a typical meditation session, with the breathing, for example, consists of 3 parts, which are repeated again and again throughout the session. And that's all we have to do is these 3 things. One part is the part or the phase or the time when we're with the breath. That's the part we all think is the meditation. That's what's, in the textbook, focus on your breath. So that's one part, the time when we are with the breath. But there are 2 other parts. The second part is the moment when we realize we got lost. So we were lost in thought, kind of unconscious, and then suddenly we wake up inside our thoughts. You know that feeling when you suddenly realize, oh, where was I? That's part 2. That's also meditation, because you've found your awareness again. You've regained, you've found the awareness, you're back. So that's part 2, phase 2. Part 3 or phase 3 is the coming back to the breath. So the first part is being with the breath, the second part is realizing you got lost, and the third part is returning. I call these 3 phases breathing, noticing, and returning. Breathing, noticing, and returning. And a meditation session will be made up of those 3 things again and again. And practicing those 3 phases makes us stronger over time, just like exercise. But the really interesting thing is that if you realize that it's those 3 things that you're training in, then you start to have a different relationship with your thoughts and emotions. Because you start to see that the thoughts, distractions, and emotions are the very thing that enable those 3 things to happen. I mean, look at it this way. If you're supposed to be coming back to the breath, well, you've got to have somewhere to come back from. So the distraction enabled you to come back to the breath. So it's not such a bad thing after all. So realizing this revolutionizes people's meditation practice. It no longer needs to be a harsh journey of failure and self-criticism and constant stress, thinking, oh, I keep doing this wrong, I'm not doing it properly. Instead, it becomes very gentle and very accepting. Just an intention is a good start. To generate the intention, I am doing this for the benefit of not just myself, but for others too. Through this practice, may I benefit others. And then at the end of the session, close down the session with a sense of dedicating the practice to the benefit of not just oneself, but others too. This means you're framing the practice, you're kind of bookending the session with compassion, intention, building intention. Really exciting research has been done in this, particularly by Tanya Singer, the neuroscientist, who has looked into, used brain scanning, brain imaging on people who practice meditation, and especially people who practice compassion-based meditation. And what's been shown is that the motor cortex in the brain has been activated and sort of trained or developed. And the motor cortex is the part of the brain that deals with intentions. And if we're literally building the intention again and again and again, and it's activating those brain regions that will make us go out and do things, well, that's a very good thing, because our compassion will cease to be just a feeling and become action. And I think the fusing, the merging together of compassion and meditation is the key. Passion, you could say, is a sort of upgrade, where compassion becomes a trainable skill of the mind that becomes an action of the body. A trainable skill of the mind that becomes an action of the body. To really help others, I think we want to help them to understand why they suffer and understand how not to suffer, which means to help others to transform their minds. I mean, the kind of person who can understand why and how people suffer and how to change that and helping them to do that. Because then you're getting to the roots of the problem, not just the symptoms. So this is built through daily meditation practice. We can't really be compassionate towards others unless we are compassionate towards ourselves. We can't. If we're constantly judging ourselves harshly and criticizing ourselves, that will project out all the time. So those two go together. The intention building and the relationship with the thoughts become a compassion practice. The key point is, what do you do with it? And how do you bring that meditation into action, into reality? And how do you make it change your day and change who you are? I mean, how does it progress? Just doing 10 minutes a day and then the rest of the day nothing isn't going to do much. But interestingly, even if you just do 10 minutes a day, but the rest of the day have tiny little drops or drip feeding it throughout the day, that does make a difference. So here I'm talking about practicing micro moments of mindfulness many times a day, even while you're busy. So it means you could be brushing your teeth, you could be washing your hands, you could be doing simple actions, but bringing your attention into that sense mode. You're sensing the moment, feeling the toothbrush against your teeth, feeling the water or soap against your hands if you're washing your hands. You can take a moment to just feel the moment in your body, and this is mindful. It's a mindful moment. But if you're building that throughout your day, I feel it's almost like drip feeding it throughout the day so that it just becomes part of you, and it means that your meditation enters your life. But there's a deeper reason for it. It's also about learning to enjoy the present moment, especially when it's a moment of discomfort. I try to encourage them after a while to start deliberately going into a mindful state when they're stuck in traffic, or when they're standing in a queue, or whenever they feel themselves to be impatient, waiting for something. Moments like that each day, waiting for something. In those moments, we generally start going into a slightly stressy state. The body starts producing cortisol, adrenaline. We go into that sort of stuck state or feeling of rushing or wanting to move forward. If you practice a moment of mindful awareness in that moment, so you're sitting behind the wheel of your car, you're in traffic, and you just really sense the chair under you, the car seat, or you're waiting for a train or standing in a queue, and you really sense the ground under your feet. If you do that, you are kind of reprogramming yourself because you're learning how to meet discomfort with acceptance and awareness, which is a form of compassion, because you're learning to forgive that moment. But also, you're teaching yourself how to be happy against the odds. How to be happy against the odds, relaxing into the moment, so you start to feel a sense of curious enthusiasm around the things that normally wind you up. So this starts to develop as what I would call independent happiness. Independent happiness. Happiness that doesn't depend on a trigger. Happiness that you can produce within yourself even in difficult situations. These kind of exercises create forgiveness. Forgiveness is, again, a trainable skill. It's where you can teach yourself to go into a more calm, more relaxed, more present state in the face of somebody, or when you think about somebody or you're with somebody who normally winds you up. It doesn't make you into a doormat. It actually makes you stronger. Forgiveness as a trainable skill is very much about two things. One is that just by meditating regularly, just the meditation alone, even a simple meditation such as what we did with the breathing, just that alone has a very powerful effect on training in forgiveness, because what is it that makes us unable to forgive is how much our mind is tormented by hurt and anger and resentment. So even though something happened with somebody, either 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago, what's happening right now is my mind is locked into a hurt, a wound, an anger, a resentment, whatever the feeling is. It's locked in, and it doesn't know how to unlock itself. We don't want to walk around feeling angry or hurt, but here we are feeling angry and hurt. So meditation obviously is going to loosen up that locked state, because through doing the daily meditation practice, we are learning to be less attached to our thoughts and emotions. That glue that I talked about before. So when you're doing meditation, you may not be directly addressing the hurt that you feel. It might be that you're just sitting there meditating and the mind starts planning menus or thinking what to have for dinner, but that's the chance to then come back to the breath, which means you're weakening the attachment your mind has to its thoughts. So this will have a profound effect on our relationship with hurt and resentment, because we are training in being able to, I don't really like the phrase let go. It's more about just leave it alone and not be bothered by it. Let it be. Do you see how that works? It's a training in not being so controlled by mental habits. So I said there were two things, two major steps in forgiveness training. One is that, just meditating anyway will help. But the other thing is through reflection, or reflecting on a subject, a topic. The topic being this person who winds you up, this person who hurts you or has hurt you or whatever it is, somebody you know or don't know, somebody you resent. And it's around starting to understand the human condition from a deeper perspective. It's about recognizing that the human being is over-controlled by one's thoughts and emotions, and this is how we are, and this is how everybody else is. So that person who has said or done the thing that we find so difficult to deal with wasn't really out to get us. It doesn't excuse or condone what they do, but it helps us to understand it. And to maybe even see how there is a part of ourself that does the same. This is the two-way street of compassion, is forgiving them and forgiving yourself. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought at the end of this talk, and I hope some of what I've said has been useful and practical for you, and thank you very much.